Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So I want you to just imagine for a second stepping into a high-stakes meeting where, for an absolute fact that a colleague is going to test your patience, question your competence, and basically just try to get under your skin.
Right, the classic nightmare scenario.
Exactly. Now imagine walking into that exact same room, but you possess this mental fortress that is so impenetrable that their insults feel like, a literal breeze against a stone wall. It just doesn't even register.
That's the dream, isn't it?
And it is. And today we are unlocking a philosophy designed to build that exact kind of psychological armor. We are doing a deep dive into the teachings of Epictetus, specifically a portion of his handbook that deals with some of the most, countercultural, occasionally shocking, and honestly, ultimately liberating advice ever recorded.
It's just a profoundly intense section of his work. What we are looking at today fundamentally challenges the default settings of the human operating system.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about, our obsessive pursuit of status, how we handle our critics, how we process profound grief, and even how we navigate deeply toxic family dynamics.
So whether you are listening to this deep dive on your commute, or maybe prepping for that stressful workplace confrontation we just talked about, or taking a long walk trying to reevaluate what actually matters in your life, consider this a shortcut to gaining profound clarity. We are searching for a bedrock of peace of mind for when everything around you just feels chaotic and unstable.
Which is exactly what this text offers.
But before we can unpack all these heavy philosophical concepts, we really need to understand the world that forged them, right? Epictetus wasn't just sitting in some ivory tower theorizing about abstract concepts.
No, not at all.
He was addressing a very specific high-pressure environment.
He really was. And to fully grasp the sheer radicality of his advice, we have to look at the societal machinery of ancient Rome. Because when you read this text, you encounter a world utterly obsessed with public status and, visible utility.
Yeah, the text mentions this overarching desire to provide porticos and baths for one's country.
Right. And it talks about the supreme social goal of making your friends Roman citizens. We see these casual references to the extreme spectacles of gladiators, the rhetorical warfare of orators, and the cutthroat hierarchy of Caesar's officers.
Okay, let me just push back on that setup for a second, because Epictetus uses these massive life or death public spectacles like gladiators fighting in the Colosseum or Olympic athletes enduring this brutal training to make points about finding internal peace.
Right, he does.
But is he suggesting that the everyday pressure to perform in ancient daily life, like, attending a dinner party or trying to secure a favor for a friend, was actually as intense as stepping into a gladiatorial arena? Because that seems like a wildly extreme comparison for just going about your day.
It sounds extreme to us, but consider the Roman patronage system, which was the absolute lifeblood of their society. Your survival, your family's financial security, your legacy, all of it depended entirely on a rigid, highly visible hierarchy.
Okay.
Every single morning, citizens engaged in this thing called the salutatio. It was a ritual where lower status clients would literally stand outside the doors of their wealthy patrons at dawn.
Wait, really? Like every morning?
Every single morning, just waiting to greet them, hoping to be seen, hoping to be granted a favor, or even just a small basket of food.
Wow, so your entire livelihood depended on whether some rich guy liked the way you said good morning to him.
Precisely. And if you made a social misstep, say you offended the wrong senator, or you failed to secure a political appointment for a crucial ally, the consequences weren't just a bruised ego.
What were they?
You could face financial ruin, social ostracization, or even literal exile. The psychological stakes were just incredibly high. So when Epictetus uses the imagery of the gladiator, he is diagnosing a society crippled by the anxiety of expectations. He is speaking to people who are terrified of being, in his own words, nobody anywhere. The internal fortitude required to survive that crushing social pressure without losing your moral compass was, in his view, exactly the same fortitude required to face a lion in the arena. You had to develop a spine of steel just to live a quiet, honorable life.
Okay, that completely reframes the entire text for me. The arena wasn't just the sand of the Colosseum. It was the marble floors of the Senate, the dinner parties of the elite, the street corners where you had to perform your social rank.
Exactly.
That just sounds utterly exhausting.
It was an exhausting way to live, and, it's a universal human vulnerability. If we look outside the Mediterranean for a moment, we see this exact same societal pressure being critiqued in Eastern wisdom traditions as well.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like Taoism, for instance. It developed thousands of miles away and centuries earlier, but it shares this profound concern. The Tao Te Ching repeatedly warns against the exhausting, soul-crushing pursuit of public accolades. Yeah, it emphasizes the concept of wu wei, or effortless action. It's about living in accordance with the natural flow of the universe, rather than forcing yourself into the artificial, superficial markers of success that society imposes. Both Epictetus and the ancient Taoist sages looked at human behavior and basically diagnosed the exact same disease. The spiritual bankruptcy that comes from tying your inner peace to external public validation.
So we have these brilliant minds, separated by geography and culture, identifying the exact same psychological trap. So if tying our self-worth to public validation is the disease, what is Epictetus's cure? How does he tell these terrified Romans, and by extension us, to handle the anxiety of being nobody?
Well, he begins by drawing a massive, impenetrable boundary line between what is our business and what is the business of the rest of the world.
Right.
He addresses the core fear head on. He anticipates the anxiety of his students who say, I shall live in discredit and be nobody anywhere. And his method of dismantling this anxiety relies heavily on the concept of the locus of control.
He essentially asks his audience, is it your actual business to get power? Is it your assigned role in the universe to be admitted to a fancy entertainment or a VIP banquet? And his answer is a resounding no.
Exactly. No, it isn't.
But the leap he makes next is what I find really challenging. He argues that if living in discredit or being a meal, nobody is considered an evil thing, you cannot be involved in evil through the actions or opinions of someone else.
Right. Let's unpack the mechanics of that because it's the cornerstone of Stoic psychology. We often feel that when someone rejects us or ignores us or passes us over for a promotion, their action somehow taints our worth.
Yeah, we internalize it completely.
We do. We internalize their external choice as an internal failure. Epictetus severs that connection entirely. He argues that evil, in the philosophical sense of moral degradation or baseness, can only be generated by your own choices.
Okay.
So, if an influential patron doesn't invite you to a banquet, that is just an external event. It is a fact of the universe. It doesn't magically inject baseness into your character. You only become degraded when you compromise your own reason and virtue to, say, beg for the invitation.
But he anticipates the pushback immediately. He imagines a student arguing, well, if I don't play the political game, if I don't kiss the ring, my friends will be unassisted. I won't have the money or the influence to help them or improve my city.
And his counterargument is incredibly sharp. He points out a fundamental logical flaw in their panic. You simply cannot give what you do not possess.
Right.
He asks them, which would you rather have? A massive sum of money or a faithful and honorable friend? If acquiring the money or the political leverage requires you to act dishonorably, to flatter people you despise, to lie or to cheat, you have destroyed the very instrument that makes you a good friend in the first place.
That is just such a piercing observation. You ruin your own character to get the resources to supposedly be a good person. But in doing so, you've robbed your friends and your community of something far more valuable. A human being they can actually trust.
Exactly.
He says, rather assist me than to gain this character, than require me to do those things by which I may lose it. It completely flips the script on what we owe our communities. We don't owe them our success, we owe them our integrity.
It really does. And this brings us to what is perhaps the most vivid, brilliant analogy Epictetus uses to illustrate this point. It completely strips away the glamour of social climbing and reduces it to a simple economic transaction.
The metaphor of the lettuce.
Yeah.
This is easily one of the most striking images in the text. Let's walk through the mechanics of this because it's so brilliantly simple.
Let's do it.
So Epictetus sets the scene. Let's say someone else is preferred before you at an entertainment, or they're given special courtesies, or they're pulled aside for a confidential chat with an important leader, and you are left out. He says, imagine you are at the market and you want a head of lettuce. The vendor tells you the lettuce costs an obulus, which is a small ancient coin. If another person walks up, hands the vendor the coin, and takes the lettuce, and you, who refuse to hand over your coin, go without the lettuce, you are a fool if you think the other person gained some massive advantage over you.
Yes.
Because while they walk away with the lettuce, you walk away still holding the coin that you didn't spend.
The brilliance here lies in how he defines the currency of social advancement. The lettuce, the VIP treatment, the political appointment, the invitation to the inner circle is not free. It is sold for a very specific price.
What's the price?
It is sold for praise. It is sold for attendance, which, returning to our earlier discussion of the salutatio, meant sacrificing your morning, standing in the cold at a rich man's door, and bearing the insolence of his lackeys just to be perceived as loyal.
So if you aren't willing to laugh at the powerful person's terrible jokes, or compromise your weekends, or flatter someone you fundamentally disrespect, then you simply aren't paying the coin. So you get the invite.
Right.
But you kept your coin. You kept your dignity. You kept your autonomy.
Exactly. He is calling out the profound hypocrisy of human nature. We want the goods, but we refuse to pay the market price, and then we throw a pity party when we leave the market empty-handed. He explicitly states that we are unjust and unreasonable if we are unwilling to pay the price for which these things are sold, but we still expect to get them for nothing.
I want to spend some time translating this into the realities of the 21st century, because the lettuce looks a lot different today, but the transaction is identical.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, the lettuce isn't usually an invite to a Roman banquet. The lettuce is the promotion to senior vice president. The lettuce is the invite to the exclusive tech networking retreat. Or, perhaps most pervasively, the lettuce is social media clout and visibility.
And what does the modern obulus look like? What is the currency we are spending today?
The currency is our most finite resources. It's our free time. It's our mental bandwidth. It's our privacy. Let's look at the influencer economy. It's so easy to look at a highly curated, glamorous life on social media and feel this intense, crushing pang of jealousy. You feel like a nobody because you aren't being flown to Dubai for a brand deal, or you don't have a million people validating your morning routine.
Right.
But you were completely ignoring the receipt for that lifestyle.
Yeah.
You didn't have to spend 5 hours setting up ring lights in your bedroom. You didn't have to turn your children's private milestones into monetizable content for strangers. You didn't have to endure thousands of hateful, vitriolic comments dissecting your physical appearance.
Yeah.
You didn't pay the price, so didn't get the lettuce. But you kept your coin. You kept your quiet, private, unmonetized life.
That is a phenomenal modern application. And we see the exact same dynamic on the corporate ladder, too. You might watch a colleague secure a massive promotion and feel deeply slighted, but you aren't factoring in that this colleague hasn't seen their children awake on a weekday in 3 years.
Oh, wow.
You aren't factoring in that they relentlessly flatter a toxic CEO and have entirely abandoned their hobbies and their health. They paid the coin. If you examine that price tag and your honest reaction is, I would never pay that, then Epictetus argues, you have surrendered your right to be upset about not having the lettuce.
Because you made a choice.
Exactly. You chose your integrity, your family, or your health over the promotion. You should rejoice in the wealth of your integrity, not mourn the lack of the lettuce.
He actually says, have you nothing then in place of the supper? Yes, indeed you have. Not to praise him whom you do not like to praise. The freedom to not flatter someone you despise is a form of massive wealth.
We can derive a highly actionable practice from this framework, actually. The next time you feel a surge of FOMO, the fear of missing out or professional jealousy, stop the emotional spiral and force yourself to become an accountant. Ask yourself, what was the exact granular price they paid for that specific lettuce, and am I genuinely willing to pay it?
Become an accountant of your jealousy. I like that. You force yourself to look at the itemized receipt. Did they pay with their cardiovascular health? Did they pay with their ethics? Did they pay with their peace of mind?
Right.
If you look at that receipt and conclude that the cost is too high, the jealousy just evaporates. It is replaced by a deep gratitude for the coin you still hold in your pocket.
It's powerful. However, we do have to acknowledge the reality of human behavior here. When you start living this way, when you actively refuse to pay the coin for the superficial things everyone else is scrambling for, you become highly visible and, well, not in a way that people appreciate. When you stop playing the game, you threaten the people who are still playing it.
Which brings us to the inevitable obstacles to growth. If you start setting boundaries, if you stop gossiping at the water cooler to gain social points, people are going to notice and they're going to react aggressively.
Oh, they definitely will.
Epictetus was incredibly realistic about this. He provides a stark warning about facing the mocking crowd.
He knew that adopting a philosophical life wasn't a path to popularity. He warns his students, if you have an earnest desire toward philosophy, prepare yourself from the very first to have the multitude laugh and sneer. He knows exactly what the crowd will say.
They will say, he has returned to us a philosopher all at once. And whence this supercilious look, it's basically the ancient equivalent of, oh, look who thinks they're better than us now.
Exactly.
Or, oh, you're doing boundaries now. You're too evolved to come out drinking with us on a Tuesday.
Right. And the mockery is a predictable psychological defense mechanism. Whenever someone changes the rules of engagement and stops participating in toxic or superficial norms, it forces everyone around them to subconsciously evaluate their own choices.
And that's uncomfortable.
That is a deeply uncomfortable experience. Their sneering isn't actually an assessment of your character. It is a shield to protect their own ego. Epictetus's advice here is a masterclass in emotional regulation. He says, do not have a supercilious look indeed, but keep steadily to those things which appear best to you. Basically, do not become arrogant, do not lecture them, simply stay the course.
That sounds simple in theory, but in practice, it is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Because our modern instinct is to fight back. We are culturally conditioned to defend our egos, which makes his next analogy so powerful.
Yeah.
He asks us to consider our physical bodies. He says if a person had delivered up your body to some passerby, you would certainly be angry. And do you feel no shame in delivering up your own mind to any reviler, to be disconcerted and confounded?
The contrast he draws is stunning. Imagine walking down the street and a colleague literally grabs you by the shoulders and forcefully shoves you into the arms of a hostile stranger. You would be absolutely furious. You would view it as a massive, unforgivable violation of your physical autonomy. You might even involve the authorities.
We protect our physical space fiercely. Yet the moment someone leaves a passive-aggressive comment on our work or insults our lifestyle choices, what do? We voluntarily hand our minds over to them.
We do.
We let their words dictate our heart rate, our mood for the rest of the day, our ability to sleep that night. We allow ourselves to become disconcerted and confounded. We hand the keys to our inner citadel to someone who doesn't even like us.
So, why do you think it is so difficult for us to protect our mental autonomy with the same ferocity that we protect our physical bodies?
Well,
we seem to believe that if someone disrespects us, we are obligated to clap back or set the record straight. It feels weak to just stand there and absorb the mockery without retaliating.
I think we have been conditioned to confuse reactivity with strength. We mistakenly believe that defending our reputation in the moment is the same thing as protecting our inner self. We think that by firing back an insult or engaging in a bitter argument, we are asserting dominance. But Epictetus disagrees.
Epictetus argues the exact opposite. Engaging with a reviler, letting them dictate your emotional weather, is an act of supreme submission. You are implicitly saying, my peace of mind is so cheap that I will trade it for the momentary, hollow satisfaction of a clever comeback.
Wow.
Furthermore, he points at a brutal irony. If you abandon your pursuit of a better life because you are worn down by their mockery, you incur what he calls a double ridicule.
Walk me through the mechanics of the double ridicule.
Initially, the crowd mocks you for trying to improve yourself. They laugh at your ambition or your newly discovered principles. Then, if you cave to the pressure, if you give up and return to their level, they don't welcome you back with open arms.
They don't?
No, they mock you a second time for being weak, inconsistent, and easily broken. You lose your integrity, and you still face their contempt. The only path to actual victory, he argues, is to remain steadfast until those very persons who at first ridiculed will afterwards admire you. You have to outlast the mockery.
Outlasting that kind of social pressure requires an almost athletic level of mental endurance, which perfectly sets up his comparison to the Olympic Games. He notes that everyone loves the idea of being a champion. Everyone says, I would conquer at the Olympic Games. But he demands that we look at the grueling reality of the prerequisites and the consequences.
He refuses to let his students romanticize the goal. He forces them to look at the process.
And the process he describes sounds like literal torture.
It does.
You must conform to strict rules. You have to submit to a terrible diet, completely refraining from any delicacies. You're forced to exercise at your absolute limit in the blistering heat and the freezing cold, regardless of whether you feel motivated. You can't drink cold water when you're thirsty. You have to surrender your autonomy to a trainer who treats you like a physician treating a disease.
And that is just the preparation. The actual event is worse.
All right, you step into the combat, you might be thrown into a ditch. You might dislocate your arm or turn your ankle. You will swallow an abundance of dust. You might get whipped by the judges for a rule infraction. And after enduring all of that physical and psychological torment, well, You might still lose the match.
By detailing this immense suffering, Epictetus is attacking the modern tendency toward dilettantism, the desire to dabble in self-improvement without bearing the cost. He warns against being what he calls a mimic or an ape. You see a philosopher, and you mimic their words. You see an orator, and you try to adopt their cadence, but you do it the way children play dress-up.
Now a philosopher, now an orator, but nothing in earnest. You love the aesthetic of wisdom, but you recoil at the labor of it.
Exactly. You cannot be a wrestler on Monday, a gladiator on Tuesday, and a serene philosopher on Wednesday. You must, as he says, be one man. You have to make a definitive, excruciating choice. You must dedicate yourself fully to either your internal reason or to the external validation of the mob.
You can't have both.
You cannot have both. If you want the profound serenity and freedom that philosophy promises, you have to purchase it. And the currency is quitting certain destructive habits, enduring the mockery of your peers, and ruthlessly mastering your appetites. You have to decide if you are willing to swallow the dust.
You can't just want the gold medal. You have to want the 4 a.m. ice baths, the strict diet, and the risk of public failure. So how do we operationalize this? How do we stop handing our minds over to the critics and start training like an Olympian of the mind? I think we need a specific, actionable practice to bridge the gap between our physical reflexes and our mental defenses. Let's call it the mind-body check.
I'm intrigued. Walk us through how to execute it.
Okay, the next time someone insults you, mocks a boundary you set, or attempts to draw you into a toxic argument, I want you to visualize them physically reaching out, grabbing your arm, and trying to drag you into a dark alley. Notice the immediate visceral response in your physical body. You wouldn't think about it. You would instantly plant your feet. You would drop your center of gravity. You would pull your arm back and fight like hell to remain exactly where you are. You would refuse to be moved.
Right. Instinct takes over.
Now, map that exact same fierce protective resistance onto your mind. When they hurl the insult, recognize that their words are an attempt to grab your mind and drag it into the mud of their own anger or insecurity. Refuse to hand it over. Plant your mental feet. Drop your emotional center of gravity. Say to yourself, I would never let you drag my body into a ditch. I am absolutely not going to let you drag my mind there. You maintain your position by refusing to react.
That is a highly effective cognitive behavioral tool. It takes the abstract concept of emotional regulation and anchors it in a physical sensation we all deeply understand. It makes the act of non-reaction feel like a proactive, powerful defense rather than a passive submission.
All right, take a deep breath. Because having tackled the exhausting pursuit of status, the price of the lettuce, and the mockery of the crowd, we are now crossing into territory that is incredibly difficult to navigate.
It is.
We're entering the most intense, potentially jarring part of this deep dive. We have to confront Epictetus's views on mortality, tragedy, the nature of the universe, and our duties to deeply flawed people. If the Olympic training sounded harsh, the mental discipline required for these next chapters is on another level.
We must proceed with careful discernment here. These chapters, if read superficially or without historical context, can sound shockingly cold, even monstrous to a modern ear.
Let's establish the baseline he sets in chapter 21. It is a very dark, very heavy starting point. He instructs his students, let death and exile and all other things which appear terrible be daily before your eyes, but death chiefly. And you will never entertain an abject thought, nor to eagerly covet anything.
This is the foundational Stoic practice of memento mori, the constant, intentional remembrance of death. From a psychological perspective, this is a form of extreme negative visualization.
But how does dwelling on death actually help you? Doesn't that just create a state of constant anxiety?
Counterintuitively, it does the exact opposite. Human beings suffer from hedonic adaptation. We quickly get used to whatever we have, and then we obsess over minor annoyances. By intentionally and systematically bringing the ultimate worst-case scenarios, death, permanent banishment from your home, total loss, to the forefront of your mind, you recalibrate your baseline for anxiety.
I see.
If you have spent the morning contemplating the fragile, temporary nature of your own existence, the fact that your patron ignored you or that someone stole your lettuce loses all its power to ruin your day. It puts the superficial desires of the ego into their proper microscopic perspective.
Okay, conceptually, I can accept negative visualization as a tool for grounding yourself. But we have to talk about chapter 26, because I struggle massively with this text. It contains a challenge that is so hard to swallow, and I want to push back on it thoroughly.
Let's hear it.
Epictetus starts with a relatable scenario. He says that when a neighbor's boy breaks a cup, We are ready at once to say, casualties happen. We are completely objective. It's just a broken cup. Physics did its thing. No big deal. But when our own cup breaks, we are instantly frustrated and upset.
He is highlighting our cognitive dissonance regarding attachment. We possess a cool, rational objectivity about the losses of others, but we are wildly subjective, emotional, and dramatic about our own identical losses.
Right. But then he takes that logic and extends it to an extreme that honestly makes my stomach turn. He says, now apply this to greater things. Is the child or wife of another dead? There is no one who would not say, this is an accident of mortality. But if anyone's own child happens to die, it is immediately, alas, how wretched am I? It should be always remembered how we are affected on hearing the same thing concerning others.
Yeah, that's heavy.
To add to this, in chapter 27, he makes a brief but incredibly dense philosophical claim. He says, as a mark is not set up for the sake of missing the aim, so neither does the nature of evil exist in the world.
Okay.
Let me speak for the listener here because I know exactly how this sounds.
Yeah.
Epictetus is literally comparing the death of a human child to a broken piece of glassware. He is telling us that losing your wife or your child is not an evil event, but just an accident of mortality, a biological inevitability. Yeah. And his advice is to brush it off the exact same way we brush off a neighbor's broken cup. That sounds completely sociopathic. It sounds utterly devoid of empathy, love, or any understanding of human connection. How can anyone extract wisdom from a philosophy that tells you not to mourn your own child?
Your reaction is completely valid, and it is the exact reason why we cannot simply copy and paste ancient texts into the 21st century without deep discernment. To a modern ear, heavily influenced by romanticism and a therapeutic culture that values the full expression of grief, Epictetus sounds like an emotionless machine.
He does.
But we cannot discard the text without understanding the specific mechanism he is trying to teach and the brutal reality he was living in.
Please contextualize this, because right now I'm struggling to find the value in this specific teaching.
First, we must remember the historical reality of the ancient world. The infant mortality rate in ancient Rome was staggeringly high. Disease, plague, sudden violence, and exile were omnipresent. Death was not hidden away in sterile hospitals. It was a daily, visible companion in every neighborhood and every home. If you allowed your inner citadel to completely collapse, if you let your psyche be permanently destroyed every single time tragedy struck your household, you would not be able to function. You would simply not survive the ancient world.
So his advice is fundamentally a psychological survival mechanism for a high mortality era.
Yes, but it is also tied to the Stoic concept of the logos, the rational, natural order of the universe. When he says the nature of evil does not exist, he isn't saying that murder or cruelty aren't bad. He is saying that the universe itself does not orchestrate events purely to inflict malicious suffering upon you.
A broken cup is the result of physics.
Exactly, and human mortality is the result of biology. His goal is the survival of the human psyche, not the suppression of all human love. He is not saying do not love your child. He is saying love your child with the constant, searing awareness that they are mortal. Do not pretend they are immortal gods.
So that when it happens.
Right, so that when mortality inevitably claims them, your grief, while profound, does not curdle into a permanent, debilitating despair that prevents you from continuing to live and fulfill your duties to the living.
So the enduring wisdom isn't don't care. The wisdom is do not let the inevitable, unavoidable facts of nature destroy your capacity to exist. When he uses the hyperbole of the broken cup, he's trying to shock his students into finding that objective, rational voice we easily access for strangers and urging them to inject a fraction of that calm into their own tragedies simply so they can keep breathing when their world falls apart.
Exactly. It is about preventing grief from transforming into a permanent state of victimhood against the universe. Nature is just nature. It is not a malicious entity targeting you.
Let's carry that crucial lens of modern discernment into our final chapter today, chapter 30, because we run headfirst into another massive cultural clash.
Let's hear it.
This chapter deals with relational duties. Epictetus argues that our duties are universally measured by our relations. We have a specific duty to a neighbor, a citizen, a commander, and he uses the prime example of a father. He says the relation of a father implies taking care of him, submitting to him in all things, patiently receiving his reproaches, and accepting his physical correction.
To understand this, we have to look at the Roman legal and cultural concept of pietas, which went far beyond our modern idea of familial respect. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, possessed patria potestas, which was the literal legal power of life and death over his family members, regardless of their age. The societal expectation of absolute submission was the glue that held Roman society together.
And Epictetus poses a deeply difficult hypothetical. He asks, what if he's a bad father? What if he is unjust or cruel? And his answer is chilling in its brevity. Is your natural tie, then, to a good father? No, but to a father.
Yeah.
He says the same thing about dealing with an unjust brother. Consider not what he does, but what you are to do to keep your own will conformable to nature. He concludes with, another cannot hurt you unless you please. You will then be heard when you consent to be heard.
Once again, modern discernment is absolutely critical here. In the 21st century, we possess a deeply developed, scientifically backed understanding of psychology, trauma, and the severe intergenerational impacts of psychological and physical abuse.
Right.
The instruction to submit in all things and patiently receive reproaches from a deeply toxic or abusive parent is not just countercultural today, it is actively dangerous. We know unequivocally that remaining in an abusive environment causes profound physiological and psychological harm.
Right. If I were to tell a listener today to just endure an abusive relationship because, oh, he's still your father or they are still your family, I would be handing them a recipe for lifelong trauma. So how do we handle this? Do we just discard Chapter 30 entirely as an outdated artifact of a patriarchal, oppressive Roman society?
We discard the ancient application, but we fiercely protect the underlying psychological mechanism.
Okay, what is that mechanism?
The profound takeaway here is not a command to remain trapped in a physically or emotionally abusive situation. Setting firm boundaries or cutting contact entirely is often the most necessary and healthy action a modern person can take. The enduring, transformative wisdom is about the locus of control over your own moral character.
Go on.
Epictetus is arguing something incredibly difficult. Your character, your moral compass, and your dignity should never be dictated by the bad behavior of others.
Oh, I see the distinction.
Yep.
So if you have a deeply unjust brother, the goal isn't to let him abuse you. The goal is to ensure that his injustice doesn't cause you to become unjust in retaliation.
Precisely. You act with justice and honor because you are a just and honorable person, not because your brother has earned it or deserves it. If you have a terrible, toxic parent, your duty is certainly not to sit there and absorb their abuse. Your primary duty is to yourself, to ensure that their toxicity doesn't permanently infect your soul. You refuse to let their cruelty turn you into a bitter, cruel, or resentful human being.
So when he says,
another cannot hurt you unless you please, he doesn't mean physical pain doesn't hurt. He means they cannot degrade your moral character without your active consent. In a modern context, it means you refuse to let their trauma dictate your morality. You maintain your honor even as you walk away.
consider the relation, not the transaction. That is an incredibly powerful way to frame our interactions with difficult people. The transactional mindset says, you are mean to me, so I am justified in being mean to you. You betrayed me, so I will betray you. It's an endless cycle of degrading each other's character. But considering your relationship with your own conscience means saying, I am a person who values firmness, boundaries, and baseline respect. Therefore, I will act with firmness, enforce my boundaries, and maintain my self-respect regardless of the chaos you are bringing to the table.
That is the ultimate text of the Stoic mind. It is very easy to be honorable, kind, and rational when everyone around you is treating you with honor, kindness, and rationality. The real Olympic training, the true test of your mental fortress, is remaining honorable when you are surrounded by the unjust, the petty, and the cruel. You refuse to let them rewrite your code.
So for the listener who is dealing with a narcissistic boss, a manipulative family member, or a deeply unjust colleague, here is the practical how-to for this section. Ask yourself this specific question before you engage with them.
And what's the question?
How can I behave in this specific interaction in a way that preserves my own honor and self-respect, completely independent of what the other person chooses to do? How can I refuse to hand over the keys to my character?
It is a dense, deeply challenging, but ultimately freeing framework for living. It asks absolutely everything of us. It leaves no room for excuses or victimhood.
It really does. It demands that we stop playing the victim to external circumstances, to critics, to the lottery of our family dynamics, and start taking absolute, unyielding ownership of our internal world. We have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We've explored the exhausting, terrifying pressure of trying to be somebody in the eyes of the public. We've learned the economics of the lettuce and realized that we possess the ultimate freedom to refuse to pay the coin for things that compromise our soul.
Yeah.
We've practiced bracing our minds against the mockery of the crowd, treating our mental autonomy with the same fierce protectiveness as our physical bodies. And we've tackled the incredibly hard, necessary truths about facing mortality without breaking, and maintaining our moral character in the face of toxic people.
There's a lot to process.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over. We've talked extensively about the price of externals. We've talked about the broken cup, the nature of grief, and the danger of handing over your mind to anyone who insults you.
Right.
If you are the sum of what you consistently pay attention to, and your internal peace is the most valuable currency you will ever possess, I want you to ask yourself, who or what is currently holding the deed to your mind?
That's the question.
Are you holding it? Or have you signed it over to a bitter critic, to the expectation of a parent, to the fear of mortality, or to a metaphorical lettuce that deep down you don't even really want? That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you the next episode.